is Monica Perez, joined today by Guido Preparata, who I would say, I think I can honestly say, is my favorite living author. He is amazing for so many reasons. And the number one, and I'm sure people have heard me talk about your books, Conjuring Hitler and the Ideology of Tyranny, but he writes in a way that is absolutely not dumbed down at all, very academic, but totally in search of the truth, which is quite unacademic these days. So without further ado, welcome Guido Preparata.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. I've tried for a long time. I never seemed to connect with you. And then my colleague, James, tracked you down. So hat tip to James. Thank you for that. But here's the number one thing I want to ask before we get into your latest book, which I haven't mentioned on the air before, Empire and Church, Anglo-America's Buyout of the Vatican and the Hyper-Modern Demise of Catholicism. So it's a slim volume, but it's kind of like an In-N-Out burger. It's got a lot of calories for the dollar, a lot of brain calories, a lot of mind vitamins in this book. And it was really worth spending the time to understand it, as is true for your other books. But I'm always struck by how unusual it is that you're so well educated. You're so brilliant when it comes to making connections and philosophy. I was just listening to your podcast or conversation with Tim O'Neill. No, who was it? On Younger. And I just, you always blow my mind. And the difference between you and every other academic stuff that things that I've read is that, I mean, you're really being honest and trying to bring the truth. And I don't know how you survive in academia that way. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your education and your career and kind of where you are now. And if you've ever gotten, how much grief you've gotten for telling the unabashed truth.
Yeah. No, first of all, thank you for the very kind and generous words that you've had for me. How I survived academia, I didn't. I didn't. But it's been a ride. I wouldn't say it's been a fun ride, but it's been a ride, all right. And you learn a lot of things. How did it start? I started by studying economics, which I didn't want to do. It was something, but it's parents says, study that so you get a job. So I did that. And eventually I wanted to study philosophy and I wanted to major in music. So anyway, and so I studied that. I studied economics in Rome, and then I just took classes at Stanford and London School of Economics. Then I got my master's and PhD in economics at the University of Southern California, and then and then I got later on in life a master of criminology in Cambridge. I taught at the University of Washington. I taught some criminology at a college in Vancouver, Canada, and then I was for 5 years at the Vatican. Was a Fulbright scholar in the Middle East in the meantime, and then last assignment was I was with the Ministry of Foreign Ministry of Taiwan, and I was there for a while, studying anthropology and money and things of that sort. And then I taught high school in LA, and I came back to Italy about a year ago and just doing my thing right now.
Where did you teach high school in LA? I live in LA at the moment, and my kids just graduated from high school.
Right, Hollywood High. That was my latest. Yeah.
Yeah, that's there. A lot of famous people have gone to Hollywood High, but you're a real polymath, is the word. Yeah, and I remember one of my favorite when I was a kid, Elizabeth Montgomery, and just a lot of people, I think, if I recall correctly. Okay, so obviously you do bring the chops, and I want to know how, first of all, like, how did you have the strength? Like, what powers you, what motivates you to stay true? I mean, under the pressure of conforming, although it sounds like you've had many interesting assignments that you survived quite a long time, and I'm sure you never deviated from your integrity.
No.
What kept you going, and then what happened?
Just long enough for them to figure it out and kick me out and catches up on you. I don't know, to be honest with you. I did what I did what for me was just a matter of course. You just study these things and you figure out, because they teach us when we're young that you got to denounce injustices where you see them. And I didn't do this with any kind of self-righteousness. I never saw myself as some kind of, now I'm going to tell you this and that. It's more like I like more the character of being puckish and like being like annoying, like a tsitsi. More like that, not in a heroic or righteous way, just more like a tsetse fly. Just I like to be annoying, but nothing more than that. And so I was at the Bank of Italy for a while. I'd started a career there, which I left to continue my doctorate. And at the time, I just thought I'd study Nazi finance as a topic to write a paper on, because I thought it was just a kind of an exotic, fancy topic. And then from there, after 10 years of study, we ended up with Conjuring Hitler. And I don't know. I mean, what can I say? For me, it's fun to get to the bottom of things. But as you do that, and I'm sure you've encountered this, you see that there's you start to there are obstacles, and there's too many vested interests, and a situation which prevents from just saying what the iniquity is all about. So in the end, to make a long story short, you get to a model. I got to a model of society which I look at it as an ant heap, right? But a special. This is why I study, and I want to write something about, because I've been studying slave making ants, which is just an extraordinary topic. You would not believe what these ants do. I mean, it's I've never. Yeah, academic stuff is just illegible, but except for entomology, and I don't like bugs at all. I had to overcome a lot of because they're gross. But the literature, it's extraordinary what these slave-making ants do. And so, stripping it all down, you come to you said, what is this society? Well, it's it's like a caste society. It's a hierarchy society with a top tier, which is parasites, and then there's the rest. And the way this is organized, but it's sophisticated. These parasites are not just some kind of lazy, disgusting worms that suck physiologically, sustenance from below. It's much more complicated than that. And as you do this, you start to understand why there's so much resistance, because people who argue and people who write and tell these stories are generally people that are in the middle stratum. And so they're the conveyor belts between the top and the bottom. And so it's basically us, right? And all of us have a very good idea of ourselves, which I think is a problem when you study, because I don't take that view at all. I'm one of those who looks at himself in the mirror and says, oh, you're such a wonderful person. I don't do that, but most people do that. Or they watch movies to side with the good guys who are going to kick ass, with the villains. I don't do that either. I'm not interested in that at all. And also the fact that most of us in the middle stratum, though we mean well and we want change, are somehow blocked in a variety of not just prejudices, but also the fact, when some very basic things, most of us have more or less, but bank accounts, where you exact interest. That too, and the moment you have that, among many other things, makes you an accomplice in the parasitical exploitation of the ant heap. And so then you realize, as you do all of this, that when you see these things in an entomological way, and as ants, then you start to understand why people who should be speaking the truth and addressing what you're saying do not, because they are vested in the system. They work for the upper tier against the other tier. And they say they don't, but they do. And this is what we do. I mean, and the vast majority of us, when our parents, and when you graduate and our parents are looking for, in your future, they all want you to be in that upper tier. They want you to be among Huxley's alphas. If you can rise to the top, you'll never rise to the top, because those are closed castes and elitist groups. But if you can be in the lower alpha, which, that stratum that is just right up there, and you talk to them.
A high staff position.
Yeah, a high staff position, whatever it could be. So an academic position is such a thing. It's just what Huxley called the alphas, right. Or a high corporate positions. Your parents want you to be safe in those combs, in the beehive up there. And you got to be up there. And yes, a lot of people suffer and a lot of people downstairs, but it's like tough luck. You know, you got to be safe, and you got to be up there. And this is the message for all of us, even the one with the best intentions, you know, and church going, whatever, the most moral of all. Still, you have to do this, but you're still in the beehive. And once you participate in any form, even with the biggest heart, you are still somehow in, you know, so if you live a life of privilege, because you do, you know, if you have time to read and philosophize, it means that you're not really, you know, working these hard jobs that don't give you any time to think and write, then you are compromised. And so you realize, in academics is the case in point, as you were saying, why don't they go all the way? For obvious reasons, because they can't. Because those people are gatekeepers of all those stories and fables that justify the fact and that account for and justify the fact that there's a very small percentage who lord it over the majority. And even Erich Fromm said this, and it's not one of my favorite authors, but he put it so plainly in a book, in an irrelevant book about Zen Buddhism. But there's this paragraph, and he says, you know, 9 out of 10 books and 99 out of 100 books, they're about, you know, what we call social sciences, philosophy or not, there to mask the fact that what I just said, a small elite exploits a huge, very outnumbers, very small exploits in various creative, tenacious ways, the vast majority. And so, and just to conclude this, it makes you realize that of all these books, and I see you have like a very rich book.
It looks, I only have them there because I use them, not because I want to look smart. It's annoying to me.
Well, let me tell you, it looks very good, and it's beautiful. And we have this, and I'm also very proud of mine, but it's like you look at it and you tell, my God, 9 out of 10 books is just crap. And that's the truth. So this is why you have to read thousands of them, or like you have to see thousands of movies before you find a good one, or you hear a good song. You got to listen to so many records until you hear a good song. It's the same for everything. So, yeah.
So I have 2 questions from that. I always have this expression, the St. Peter test. Like, when you're at the pearly gates, what are you going to tell St. Peter? Like, I voted for the lesser of 2 evils. And he's going to be like, so you voted for evil. Is that what you're telling me? So I have to say, so are you telling me I need to stop working so I don't pay taxes because taxes are killing Syrian babies? Which I'm tempted. Like, that's a real moral problem for me. Like, I don't want to participate in the system because it pays for the evil.
Everybody has this problem, and everybody says, like in Ideology of Tyranny, I remember some guy said, yeah, great. But, you know, what do we do? I mean, you're good at, you know, spitting all this venom against the system. But what do we do? Yeah. And I said, well, that's the big question. What do we do? There is no way of winning against this ant-heap and this elite. They're very strong. They're very resourceful. They command, and they're extremely creative. This is what I was saying. So you're going to collide head on with them, you're going to get just flattened. And I say this, or what we can do, and you just mentioned taxes. There are 2 ways in our system in which they suck resources out of everything with the complicity of all the middle strata as well. Well, taxation is, as you mentioned, that's the direct way of just, you know, we take this and we do things. And you're part of the system and you cannot evade it. The other one, and I mentioned before, is through bank accounts, is the financial link. Crucial. The only way for us to opt out of the system without really opting out, still being there, but trying to dissent, is attempt. And we're going to the final prescriptive phase, which generally comes at the end of the discussion, but I'm just going to put it.
Yeah, go for it. Punchline first. That's great.
Yeah, the only way that we can try is to recreate a nest for us next to the big one, but we're not in there, where we can isolate ourselves enough by using juridical forms such as, you know, regions with special autonomy have in various countries, if we can, where we are going to try to reduce taxation as much as possible, and where we can create our own banking system with characteristics that are completely different from what we have now. And it's a thing that I've been advocating for 20 years, ever since I've been writing about this stuff, about creating, you know, credit unions with perishable money, that kind of a thing, which is revolutionary.
Oh, Emile Zola was talking about that. I still have to try to get my mind around that. I mean,
who is?
Emile Zola, remember?
Emile Zola, yeah.
Yeah, he blows my mind, and I'm sure like you'd be the person to ask if I ever wanted to go down that road. But I was trying to get my mind around his idea of separating the medium of exchange from the store of value. And he actually posited, or somebody who was riffing on him or examining in retrospect, that what really made Bernard Baruch decide that Hitler had to go was when he introduced the Reichsmark or whatever, like 1 unit of labor was equal to 1 coin, and it was removed from the banking system. I don't know if
I don't
you've
know
ever
this
heard of that.
I don't know the story of Baruch. No, you'll have to tell
Oh,
me.
well, I have 2 books that I'll send
Okay,
you that
great.
and they're hot, little hot to handle because you're not afraid, but like I say, it's like I think
Mm,
Emile Zola was basically a real fascist. Like he was ended up and committed instead of going to jail because he literally like went to Italy to work for Mussolini. But he's a beautiful writer, and
Oh, you
he
mean? Oh, I thought of Ezra Pound.
Ezra Pound. Sorry, it's
Mm.
Ezra Pound. Yeah. Right. Sorry, Ezra Pound.
Yeah,
So
but that's the problem. So these, this is not what we. This is not the topic, but these ideas come from the anarchistic camp. It's a bunch of Germans, Gesell and these others, and Rudolf Steiner, and people have nothing to do. But yes, unfortunately, Ezra Pound in his broadcasts in admiration of Mussolini and all that threw these things in, and yes, ever since he did that, kind of tarnished that thing. But and sad thing because he was an amazing poet
I
too.
know he was such a good writer.
Yeah,
But I was thinking about, I still have yet to get my mind around
yeah.
how that was such a break, even the idea of a medium of exchange being separate from a store of value. Are you familiar with the agorist movement in the United States? It's like
No,
you try to have gray markets instead of black markets. Are you
no,
familiar with that? No.
great. I'm just right on agorist. You said
Agorist, Agorist.
okay.
And
Gotcha.
people are right now, they're just saying the more you can engage, it's an offshoot of libertarianism, but the more you can engage in the gray market, which is you have a chicken, I have an orange tree, like let's trade eggs for oranges as much as possible and not participate in,
Yeah,
the
they've
third party system of money.
they have been trying to bypass the banking system in every way because the tribute it exacts, the interest is so huge, and this is a problem that at least in the anarchistic tradition since the times of Proudhon and 150 years ago been trying to solve this. The solution is at hand. I mean, we know what mechanism we need to do. Now we have to implement it. So I was saying, if we want to have a solution, we have to be able to find a place where we isolate ourselves enough where we're not reached through taxation and when we have our own banking system, which is just very utopian, but there's no other way. And the way to do this, I don't know, maybe to incorporate as a trade union there or what, or as a church or things that protect you from the fiscal viewpoint. And inside of this, the idea is to create the beating heart would be a credit union with completely different, more wholesome ways of creating money, which is not with interest. Of course, can you do this under the radar? Very hard. They're going to come for
Right.
you. They're going to come for you. And all these stories, and this, we can talk about this in another story, in another conversation. But anytime the system sees that you're trying to bypass it by trying to dodge the two main tentacles it uses to wrap you to itself, it's going to send the cops. I mean, it has to defend itself. So it's very much we have, it's kind of a struggle.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. So that leads me to something that's more, kind of everybody's top of mind question, who, especially who listens to me, is what is your view of how the power structure really works? Like, is there a cabal? Like, is the cabal self-aware? Like, is there a committee of 300 that runs the world? Does the King Charles III really have the most power? I knew a very high level private banker in Europe from, his family had like a bank for 250 years. And I asked him, who's the most powerful person in the world? And he said, which you would maybe disagree with at this point, he said to me, your Pope. And I was like, the power? He said, power. But that was when Ratzinger was in charge. But I found that very hard to believe. And I still find it hard to believe. So I'm wondering what you think is kind of, the real how much power does the top have, and do they know that they have the power? Is it one guy? Like, how does that operate?
Yeah, well, I mean, we live in a highly hierarchized society, sort of formed of societies, and yes, of course, they're aware of their power, and they do anything possible not to make you understand how it works. They make everything possible to confuse the issues, to make it blurry, to make themselves look as if they're humanitarian and they care about you, and so on and so forth. This is very old. I mean, they've always done this. They were kings, and we still have kings, and they're perfectly conscious of their power. In our time and age, the new emperors are it's this Commonwealth of Anglo-America. It's them. I mean, whether good, hardworking Americans refuse the idea because they identify with a sense of, on the one hand, but on the other, they see what's wrong. I know it might be difficult to accept, but this is how it is now. And of course, and they have satrapies, they have vassals that are faithful in Europe and everywhere in the world that do their bidding. I mean, this is just as traditional as it has ever been.
So one big question, and then one question that I'm thinking that arises from this recent book, Empire and State, and Empire and Church, that. So you said it's the Anglo-American establishment, which I would say Quigley echoes, and probably Anthony Sutton. But right now in the conspiracy world, there are a lot of camps that say it's the Jews are in charge of everything, or the Jesuits are in charge of everything. That the power is in the Vatican, or the power is in Tel Aviv. It does not look like Israel is running the world right now. But I mean, what do you think about either of those options?
I've been in power structures and at levels that are not particularly high, so I haven't been really up there. I mean, I've been inside enough to understand a few things. The story about the Jews, frankly, I've never encountered anything like this. And Israel, we know what it is. It was a British creation.
An outpost.
It's an outpost. It's just it's a presidium that it's at the end of the fault line and goes all the way from Poland all the way down to that part of the Middle East.
Yeah, it was probably like make sure nothing like the Ottoman Empire ever popped up again.
Yeah, I mean
the
British strategists think in maritime terms. They're an island. They don't think in continental terms. And so for them, they're the best at it, and they want to keep control. And they even explicitly wrote how they operate. For them, anytime they see a potential power consolidation over the Eurasian landmass, they've got to intervene because if it happens, this coalescence of forces generally centering around Russia and Germany, those two must never get together.
I know the Mackinder thing. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, because if they do, from the British viewpoint, it's over. Yeah. They control a surface that is just impregnable. It's very, very basic.
And the Middle East is the nexus between the East and the West.
Middle East is right there, and so is Poland. So this is why along this fault line is
the corridors.
It's a corridor, and it's just oozing with blood for obvious reasons because they cannot allow it. And how to do it, they just plant, as they say themselves, we call them wedges. And so they plant wedges. And Israel they brought people and then given this idea of the recuperating the land and whatnot. But it's irrelevant. It's a British thing. And the Americans have taken it over for their purposes of the war games in an Orwellian framework. For me, 1984 by Orwell, the book within the book, where I cite it all the time, it's pretty much all there. A guy, Orwell was
British intelligence,
Yeah, he was close to British intelligence, and he just told you what they're about to do. When you read the book, and it's like Oceania is Anglo-America. It's not even conspiracy. It's in your face. And so, and the rest, he says, it's going to be a giant TV studio where they're going to have their war games, wars that should never end, because he says the constraint is that whatever economic surplus there is, which could enrich the world, and if people are rich, they can enjoy their time. They don't have to work as much. That should never happen. So that's
the tragedy. Yeah.
Never. We got to dissipate it. And what's the best way to dissipate it? Crises, wars, and so. I mean, and it's a conspiracy. No, it's not conspiracy. It's Orwell told you how it works. At some point, 1984 was selling more than Harry Potter, and I thought, great. So But then I just start talking about 1984, and people look at me going, "What?" And so I don't know.
Well, it gets redirected. That's energy. That's what the conspiracy. So I am 100%. I think basically everything's a conspiracy and a false flag. That doesn't make me crazy. I mean, there is a conspiracy, and to say that there isn't, I think is a little bit crazy. However, the conspiracy industry now, I think, is a dissipation, is a way for people to spend their intellectual curiosity in a dead end that they can't do anything about.
Well, they're very good at it because even Amazon, wrote a friend of mine who is deeply into these conspiratorial things, says, by seeing what you've been watching, my dear Joe, whatever, here's some videos that could interest you. So it's like the system itself. The system itself feeds you like conspiratorial stuff, and most of it is junk. So just to give you an idea of how flexible and how perfectly in charge of the game they are, they control every end of it. This goes back to the first part of your question: is there an elite that's conscious of its role? Of course it is. But we're going back to that citation in the Eric Fromm book. When you are one and you have to rule over 1 million, you have got no other choice than to mystify. Because what can you do? Or else people are going to assault you and lynch you and strip you naked and so on. So you can't do that. I mean, if you want to be in charge the way these people are in charge, it's the only way you could do. You gotta mystify.
So before I let that question slip away about the Jesuits and the Vatican, the people
Jesuits
who think that they're in the middle, like, I don't know if you know Avro Manhattan, like he writes a bunch of books about the Vatican.
No, I didn't read that one.
No, you wouldn't read this. I don't think so.
No. I'm sure it's fun and all.
There's a lot of the stuff like that, and I've never really fallen into that rabbit hole, but I figure you would know.
Well, I was with them for 5 years, the Gregorians, so it's a Jesuit, flagship, and not high enough to see. I've seen their leader. I mean, I've attended, talks and conferences and with the Black Pope and all that. Really charming people. And
do they believe in God?
Good question. The church is an army. It's an army, and so they obey, and they have their generals, and they do what they have to do. All I can tell you is that I was paid out of funds from American donors, and so it's
so. Is it as rich? I read this stuff about Calvi. Like, I have a book.
Oh, Calvi.
The Money Changers. I have a book.
Oh, yeah.
And when I read that book, the whole thing, and I was not convinced that the Vatican is sitting on trillions of dollars of ancient wealth. Like that, it seems to me like they care about their financial fortunes rise and fall, ebb and flow. Do you think that there's this, just huge mound of gold under there, and they could turn around and run the world if they want? Like, I did not see that.
It very, very opaque, the church. They'll never let you. There is the least transparent organization you can think of.
Wow.
And still Italians don't know the history of the Vatican, so it was so conspicuously important in managing Italian things. What appears to be, I won't say certain, but what we know is that at one time in the early 70s, there was a project fronted by the church. So Paul VI was in charge then, and the Christian Democrats, who were his, the political party of Italy that was the vanguard of the Vatican, of creating an alternative financial system to the Rockefeller or whatever. There was some kind of trilateral, different kind of, let's call it lay anti-Catholic pole, just to create its own thing. And apparently the Nixon administration was it seemed to be favorable, because when Nixon fell in 1974, this whole thing was bazookaed out into nothingness. And so it seems like this, and the whole history of the 70s in Italy, which were violent, has to do probably with a very mysterious thing, that the church was trying to do things her way in the US, and part of the US was with it and part was not. And in the end, they nixed it. And it took them 20 years to unwind the position with the destruction of the Christian Democrats in 92. And ever since, the Vatican with John Paul try to resist, and that's the story I tell in the book that
Yes.
and then surrender completely, because from the viewpoint of Anglo-America, the Vatican was the last empire, a deterritorialized empire that controlled 1 billion souls, which listens to a different dicastery than theirs, which from the viewpoint of London and New York is, as I wrote, perfectly intolerable. And so they had to have it. And now with the abdication of Ratzinger, they had it. And with their own candidate, it's a box they just bought, like Chrysler bought Fiat, and now they have it, and it's theirs.
Well, that is the essence of the book, certainly the second essay of the book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I want, before we move on from one thing you said earlier, though, I do want to know if you believe that story about the popes. I'll refer to that in a second. But one thing you said just a minute ago was how American patriots have a hard time understanding the true nature of the American state or of the empire. And you start this book, Empire and Church, which is actually an adaptation of your I don't think it's an intro, I think it was an afterword of the New World Order book by Sean Stone.
Mm-hmm.
But this starts with saying that we think of the deep state as, I think I'm understanding this correctly, we think of the deep state as a way to justify
Mm-hmm.
the American system as it was good, but it is
Mm-hmm.
corrupted. And you're
Mm-hmm.
saying by its very nature, it is an imperial state. It is, you're not controlling it. There's not a deep state and a shallow state. It is what its own nature really is. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, perfectly. Yeah, it's exactly it. Yeah, well, because there are a lot of really good people that have worked in the state in a variety of managerial positions, and perfectly good folk, and they want to think that the structure of the beehive in which they live that represents them is wholesome. Like, this goes back to what I was saying. It isn't. I mean, the state is the state, and it's a parasitical structure which is there to control and make sure that everybody is well in order for them to work.
Yeah.
That's the sole concern. It doesn't really care that you're healthy because it wants you to be healthy. It cares, and it prohibits drugs and so on and so forth, not because it wants you to be healthy and it wants your memory and your mind to work perfectly. It wants you to be lucid enough to punch the card and work. And so, and from the moment that you are not fit anymore, it doesn't care at all. And then you may die immediately because it doesn't want to pay your pension anyway, and so on and so forth. So a lot of people want, and this is mostly middle-class people, middle-class academics and people, the writers and the thinkers, so on, who think, again, it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, people who have a very high idea of themselves, and they don't want to think that, and they are involved with the system, and it's okay. How can you not? You got a family, you got mouths to feed, sure, but they cannot bring themselves to say, I got mouths to feed, but I'm a cog into what is a very unjust machine. They cannot bring themselves to say that, so they come up with the idea of a deep state. It's
right. A betrayal, something
well,
that's
yeah,
obscured.
it's a nice, big, luscious apple.
Yes.
Yeah, but there's that region down in the core which is rotten, and it's full of these, horrible people. But no,
you're never getting it out of there. So, I mean, you're not. I gather that you're not an anarchist, or are you? Because isn't there?
Yeah, I am actually.
You are.
I think, yeah.
Is that consistent with Catholic teaching? I considered myself an anarcho-capitalist, and now I am an aspiring agorist. But a priest sent me a book like, you can't. You're not supposed to be an anarchist.
No, that's exactly where we come from. That's our tradition. Although an anarchist, yes, Catholic anarchist, that's us. Although it's weird because a Catholic owes allegiance to Rome, and there is that quote, which just kind of puts in a weird position. In the end, I guess we respect the tradition, and we know that there is something beyond the veil. not so naive as to say there isn't, and this is where we come from. But there's that. But once you are in the church, it makes you think. And there's that quote in that book by that French author Maurras of the Action Française, who was compromised also with the Nazis during Vichy. And I say that, whatever he's saying is very close to what American neocons are saying today. And there's that quote where he says, what's really dangerous about Catholicism, it's its anarchism, and we have to make sure we control that, because it's a drift. And this drift is like these people, these believers could be very insubordinate, because the faith might make them think that they are answerable only, to the higher principle, and they're not going to obey us. And I have never read anything as so cynical but poignant at the same time. And that quote is so important. Now I forget what page
it's in
it is.
the book. Yeah,
it's extraordinary. And now and then they say, and this is why these nationalists were trying to cajole the church and very praiseworthy of the church, though Maurras and his friends were not even believers, but they understood the importance of the church in regimenting people with this, self-sacrifice, and because Catholics make good soldiers, and it's exactly what Hitler was saying, and this is what made him do the concordat with the church, and so on. And so all that story is told there. And the church comes out as, we Catholics could also say, there's a deep state within the Catholic. There's a deep church that's not us. But frankly, I guess we must have the guts to say maybe we have to create our nest elsewhere. We're cherishing our tradition, but frankly, if you want to be really free from all these injustices, you got to rethink it all. And if you stay within the system, and you got to acknowledge that you are part of an injustice, even though you're there with the best of intentions and being honest, even then.
When I was I was talking about anarcho-capitalism on a radio station that I was on, which was a conservative radio station, and I was beyond libertarian. I was anarcho-capitalist, and I know now, like, capitalism just has too many. I didn't think of it. I was thinking of just using capital. I wasn't thinking of capitalism, but it is. So I don't like the term anymore. However, my argument, when people would say it's impossible, I'd say, and I would not just include Catholicism, but I would say billions of people, probably half of the world, actually claim they believe in God and behave on their own accord. They stay within the laws of morality, which are even stricter than actual laws, and they engage in charity. So they are taxing, they're doing all these things voluntarily, and it's much more effective than the way the actual government works. So I would say that we are told that in the Middle Ages, the question of the existence of God was unthinkable. But now the question of the necessity of government is unthinkable. People won't allow themselves to think that question. But I did think people will throw Bible quotes at me and say, well, we're supposed to accept the authority of the kings on earth or whatever. There's some of that, but I'm not great with, like, the Bible.
Well, you raised the big issues. Allow me, though, to publicize, because I put out a bunch of books out there, and I'd be happy to send you also a copy. But I address on this because it's called The Political Scripting of Jesus, and it was.
I don't have that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and it was based on some notifications that the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, basically the New Inquisition, kind of chastised a bunch of theologians for writing nonsense about Jesus. And so I took these stories to ask myself, what is the story of Jesus really about? And what does it mean, politically speaking, when a person says, I believe in Jesus? And so all of that is addressed there. And some very tough questions, all these stories about Jesus being a radical Marxist. Is it true?
Well, it's so violent. Isn't Marxism violent? I have a question about that for
Or
you.
just a revolutionary? Was he really revolutionary? What's the story about? Just when he was 2 inches away from revolution, he starts to stage this big suicide of his, and the role of Judas, and this and that, and how the Jesuits were bringing the gospel to Japan, and how and why they were persecuted, and what made them do this, and why would they want to do this, and what did it mean, and why were there so few Japanese Catholics, and what did they do with the cult of Jesus, and why, and all the story. What is the story of Jesus? And it is so important, and nobody really addresses it. Just in what if? I mean, do you believe the story? You believe the story is true, but what? How do you know for certain? And what does it? And so on and so forth. It means something very important, but this faith of yours, from a political viewpoint, this engagement of yours, what does it mean? And and all of that is packed into this. And I would really love to challenge people and so-called believers to explain to the rest of the world, what does that mean? Or do we really have to believe in all, be it this or the story of Islam or Mohammed or the story of Buddha? Is it really essential that we go through all of this to be loving to one another? Also, very important question, and so on.
I would love to read that book and discuss it with you, and also lure you in with any excuse to come back, because I want to talk about every single one of your books.
I'll send you the PDF for sure.
Thank you. That would be perfect.
Yeah.
So I've also, and I wonder if you address it in there, one thing I think is so completely underreported about the message of Jesus, and I personally think it's the most important one, is the Samaritan story, where, like, I feel like it's to abolish the in-group, out-group thing, that you just can't, when you have, and I feel like Tolstoy kind of hit on that, you can't have in-groups and out-groups, and that's not Christian. And but I feel like everybody wants that, so they completely underplay that, but it would be the beginning of the solution.
Oh, it's great that you mentioned Tolstoy. Of course, Tolstoy is at the center of my book as well, and it's
really?
So important. Yes, the Confession is just a classic, and not mentioned at all. I mean, not as much as it should. Very important, but that critical. But Tolstoy refuses all the miracles. He doesn't want any of that. So it's a kind of a puritanical, anarchistic revision of the Gospels. And of course my eternal Veblen is always put in play in that as well. But even episodes that are very disturbing for believers, like when Jesus is really mean to the woman from Canaan, right? Eat the crumbs off my table, and so.
Yeah, he was not touchy-feely. He turned over the tables.
Please help me. And he says, I haven't come for you. What do you mean? So I don't know. I mean, we've come to a point.
You're not going to crack the code for us on the true meaning of Jesus right now? We've got like 20 minutes. I'm just kidding.
No.
I'm going to read the book first, of course.
Yeah.
So, but since we were talking about it, you have a story in the book that is a story that runs around the halls of the Vatican, that Cardinal Ratzinger was given 7 years to save the church from the claws of, it was almost like there were corporate raiders at the door, and they were ready to take it away. And he's just like, give me a chance. Let's save the company. Are you with me? And then when he couldn't do it, whether it was his fault or the cards were stacked against him, Bergoglio, who I don't know. I know Cardinal or Bishop Strickland was just ousted because he criticizes Papa Frank.
I don't know. You asked me about. I don't know about Strickland. I'll ask my friends who are still inside the box.
Yes,
to tell me what's going on. Yeah, when I heard the story of Ratzinger, I mean, these are all sources from the insider information I got from people inside, and they listen and so then graciously tell me about it.
You believe it?
Yeah, I believe it. It's I've got confirmation from very high source. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're honest and smart, so I'm going with your assessment.
No. I mean, it's like, who's your source? Well, they're
Yeah,
inside.
they've got the ethos. You're going to go with it.
Yeah, who are your sources? Well, I have a few, and I've cross-referenced, and everybody says because the story is like, what he was given, and it's exactly the time it took. It looks like a major conspiracy, and but this is how it works. I mean, a conspiracy, of course. I mean, again, in a hierarchy,
it's too important not to be. It's too important not to be. They don't leave these things up to secret ballots. Like, it's just not believable thousands of years in that they haven't figured out how to hijack that system.
In a society as hierarchized as ours, where the stakes are so huge, of course everything is done on a conspiratorial basis.
The ballot is just the smoke and mirrors. Like, they have to have it so that we can pretend like it's a system that has value.
I don't think there's anybody so foolish as to believe that his or her vote really counts for anything. So
yeah. So I have some very specific questions that I wanted to ask you, but before I do, this is James, my colleague with whom you have interacted. He wanted to know if you have a couple of books, maybe stuff that went into Conjuring Hitler, because first of all, I would say Conjuring Hitler is a must buy. It's Conjuring Hitler, How Britain and America Made the Third Reich. And I would really like listeners to support you. And if they're going to do that, this is the book. Conjuring Hitler is just unbelievable.
There's a new edition.
Yeah.
There
is. Yes, there's a new. It has a different cover too.
Yeah, it's mine. It's on my label. And
great.
There's a bunch of long essays about the Inquisition that I was subjected to but it's not because of my personal story, but the things that after that experience that came out of that really interesting. So it's much bigger, and yeah.
So I actually tried to go to GuidoPreparata.com from all of my browsers, and I was not permitted access. So how do they buy that?
It's on Amazon for the time being.
So the latest edition on Amazon is yours. Okay, that's great.
Yeah, so it's cheaper too than that one. So
yes, excellent. So I would first of all say, if you want to know about World War II, that's the first book you buy. But James has probably all your books, just like I do. So if you could get, he and I love these books. This series, it's 2 or 3 books about the First World War, Hidden History, the Secret Origins of World War I.
The McGregor one, yeah. Apparently, he has a new one in the pipeline, and I was supposed to talk to him. Yeah, nice folks. Yeah.
What would be a World War II book you'd recommend in addition to yours?
Good question. Let me think about it. One that
I'll put it in the show notes. You don't have to answer now.
No, I guess yes. I want to think about it. I mean, Joachim Fest's biography of Hitler was a good book.
I have that.
Yeah. I remember enjoying the read. Most of the times, I just really got nervous, but that one didn't roil my nerves too much. But I'll think there are some good books. I just have to think.
That Joachim Fest book was given to me by that banker I was telling you about earlier. He was German, and he gave me that book. He also gave me The Politics of Cultural Despair by, I think, Fritz Stern, perhaps.
Yes, yeah.
And I won't even read it because I didn't like the title, because I always think everything like that is bullshit. Like the politics of cultural despair, like culture, like things are a zeitgeist, like things are brought up from the roots that the top is reacting to the people. And I feel like these weird, animal spirits or whatever Keynes would call it, like these things that happen in the masses, to the extent they do appear to emerge organically, I feel like they're almost always a result of a technological advancement or something that really changed the world. And that a lot of times, even those technological advancements are parsed out or released on purpose, like the birth control pill. Like when you have a cultural revolution, I feel like it's usually manufactured. So I didn't want to read the Stern book, but maybe I will if you.
Yeah, no, I have it. I have it. I have the book somewhere.
Did you read it? Do you think it's valid?
I don't remember if I read it. I'm going to go over it again.
Well, because it leads to another question. It leads to a question that I had for you for today, is that I was trying to look for an insight into what looks to me like a very manufactured emergence of a far right in America. Right now, our right, like conservatism in America, should be restoring the Constitution. Conservatism is like monarchical or hierarchical in Europe. It seems to me the far right that's emerging here now, that like revises National Socialism and stuff, is is manufactured. And I was trying to get an insight into that. And you actually had a very provocative line in here saying, and I think you're 100% right, about that the far right could be activated at any time for civil strife, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And, I just wonder if, you can elaborate a little bit on if you're paying attention to this weird thing that's happening right now, where the reactionism to what people are calling cultural Marxism, which you say is misunderstood, is that they're saying what we need is a kind of nationalism. And instead of looking towards one that might work, they look at ones that failed horribly,
Yeah.
And
You're asking
sorry,
questions.
I'm just saying, like,
Really tough.
well, first of all, do you think this American right that's emerging, does that
No,
look organic to you?
no. Let me. Yeah, no. I'm going to try to answer this without
Okay.
losing myself in the answer.
Sorry. I
No,
know
no,
it's a big
no,
question.
they're really thick questions. As to what to read, speaking of Nazis, I would recommend to read Ernst Junger, who is a very famous German writer. For me, I always say stylistically he is perfection. And this was somebody who was really in that, Nazi camp before the war. After the war, he kind of changed and saved to save his skin. But if one wants to have an idea of what this Nazi mindset is, Junger gives some clues. And I was reading also these days this woman, this French Greek woman, she's been defined Hitler's priestess. They wrote a book about her. By the name of her name was Maximiani Portas, but she went to India and renamed herself Savitri Devi, and she's well known into the Hitlerite camp. And she's been writing about Nazi philosophy and then a Nazi claim to glory and so on and so forth. Very interesting there also to understand more of these things that have been trivialized after the defeat of Nazism, just to understand more what this was, which was a very strange thing, the phenomenon itself. As for the right wing, the new I don't know. You mean beyond Trump, right?
Trump, to me, I mean, he was an actor who was
Sure.
trained
Yes.
by Jeff Zucker, who ran CNN, which
Yeah.
is the Democrat one. So he's just, to me, he's an absolute puppet. And I'm not saying it's
court
his.
jester.
Yeah. No, right. Yeah. Whatever he is, it's not what his fans, I think it is.
No, I don't
But
think
it's an outgrowth that he brought identity politics to the right. And I think of your book, Ideology of Tyranny, with Foucault and everything in the 80s. And they were trying so hard to bring identity politics to the right. And it took Trump to do it. Yes. So now I would say, in answer to your question, yes, it is definitely an outgrowth of the Trump moment.
Trump, I think the phenomenon of Trump was done to plumb and fathom how much dissidence there is in the state amongst those white strata that have been abandoned, right? Because now the system is so perfect in recruiting talent wherever it wants that it can afford to dismiss the less talented whites, which up to a certain point had direct access because of their ethnic belonging to the manning the console. At a certain point, some of them were excluded. And so I guess they were just testing how many there were and how dangerous they were. And they realized that there are quite a few, but they're absolutely harmless. As far as the more radical right-wingers, I don't know exactly. I haven't surveyed everything in the States, and I cannot say for certain. What I know from the European experience is that they've always have been, in any case, creations of the political bureaus of the police and of the Ministry of the Interior. Case of Italy is well known, but this is true also in France and so on. And so whenever they want to create the conditions for creating civil strife, they start to deploy these provocateurs and to have street clashes and so on and so forth. And the way they recruit and the human types they look for and so on is also almost a science. It's what I study from my master in criminology. the types of social psychological profiling to find people that eventually were going to becoming terrorists and so on and so forth. So yeah, I don't believe that any of these are organic or genuine, because I was expecting these genuine movements to emerge immediately after 9/11, and they were nowhere to be seen. So I would say, from my viewpoint, definitely not.
I think something that was more genuine, although some people will say that it isn't at all, but I really think that I mean, you were raised here too. When Ron Paul's message, which was about the Bill of Rights and liberty, I had a radio show, a call-in radio show. I could, people drive around in the cars and listen and call me. So I was shocked at how many people called and echoed things that I was saying, which were echoes of what my father taught me, which was more like a classical liberal thing or whatever, a traditional American conservative. I think the Ron Paul phenomenon was tapping into something very organic. And I think that that what you're talking about was introduced in addition to what you're saying, but as they hijacked that energy, because plus they had to hollow out that too. They had to neutralize it. So I think there was some real energy there, but I think they successfully redirected it towards just general anger. General, I hate Democrats, which is not what Ron Paul's message was at all.
Right. And I think that I remember after 9/11, there were the anthrax threats, but I remember very, very few, Congress people had the guts to say anything. I mean, one of the few was Cynthia McKinney.
Yes, Cynthia McKinney. I know, and boy,
she was basically alone. And
and they districted her away. Like they
managed to they demonized her as well, and successfully, I think. And and so I was 9/11 for me, and another one of my books, and I'll send you Phantasmagoria, that I've written about, for me, what 9/11 was and the reason why, what was behind it, was a major turning point, an epical divide, where really you saw what was happening, and the end of Dissent. I mean, you could see that there was no, it was finished, and then whatever resistance that has to be created has got to be led by very few at extraordinarily high costs. And we're seeing it's been 20 years, and we know how difficult it has been for most of us.
But it seems hopeless. The cost is high, and the chances of success seem like zero to me. I mean, I'm not a black pill person. I'm what you described in the beginning. I'm like, you know what? I can't do anything about this. I need to feed my kids, and I'm just gonna.
I could not agree more, and I feel exactly these words every day. But in the end, it's like, it's the old samurai thing. The battle's lost already, so might as well fight it.
That's well put.
Whatever. We'll lose. Okay, fine. And in the meantime, I'm just going to.
I know, but what sacrifice is necessary? I mean, you've sacrificed a lot. And I don't know if I have it in me. I just don't know what to say. Plus, as a wife,
you obviously do. I don't know. I think I'm talking to a lot of folks, and I've had a lot of really lovely people from as far from Australia to Ireland, and we have a good group here in Italy as well. I have been telling these guys, why don't we just start to meet,
Yeah.
in the flesh, and
let's do it.
Yeah, and to start talking, because there are, at least we should try something.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, honestly, like keep me in the loop. I will try. What I was going to say is, like, as a wife, and a mother, because my kids wanted to go to college, and I was like, let's take the money and buy a farm. And they're like, no. So one of them wants to be a lawyer, one of them wants to be a doctor. I'm like, you know what? Those could come in handy unless we're all living on farms. Like, I actually want the doctor. Like, I don't want that person to be absorbed into the medical machine, but I would like somebody to be able to suture a wound in the tunnels when the time comes.
I know.
But you can't just step out for not drag your whole family with you.
No. And I know. But, for college in the US, it's become very hard, as you know better than I do, what the costs are. And one of the reasons that we came back to Italy is because we could because there's free college, So,
Oh yeah, that's help. I mean, might as well if we are paying for our own indoctrination, probably paying double because we pay the taxes and then we pay the school also. But I know it is on an hour, and you said we could go a little bit longer. I just wanted to make sure I hit on a few of the things in the book that I had jotted down. Two things that are big ideas. Let's do it in reverse order. You refer to the technostructure and techno-fascism.
Mm-hmm.
Just as maybe even a teaser for people to read the book and understand it better, could you give us a couple of lines on what those terms mean to you?
Yeah, it was. They came from the fact that there's all this debate about, well, should we have a private system? Should we have a public system? And then there's, I'm a good person, I'm a progressive, and you're not a progressive, so you're a fascist. And so these things are deeply rooted in our lingo. This fascist thing, of course, in Italy, I do not need to mention how strong it is. And if you disagree with a progressive, immediately, you're fascist, and so on and so forth. And so my response was, we don't, the system is we live in an ant heap. It's a mechanized ant heap. And this distinction between public and private is, for the most part, specious. It's not really, yes, I mean, there are, but it's a monolithical structure. And it's not true that the bankers rule the world. The bankers are part of this elite, and they fulfill some precise instructions at very high level, fairly highly remunerated. But it's again, it goes back to the elite and which governs this thing in a very, very streamlined, efficient way. And so again, and then this summarizes the whole story of the deep state and so on. It's the state, and it's a state and economy as one. Some of them are more efficient than others because there's more deregulation at certain levels. But in the end, there's very little freedom, so to speak. It's and very little market for those who worship the free market. It's all very much controlled.
Is it global? Or are there, is China as the same techno structure as the Anglo-American?
Yeah, it's global. Yeah, China wouldn't exist if she hadn't been inducted by the U.S. and the World Trade Organization. So
those are more, yeah.
If China, this story that China is like the new competitor.
And Nixon did it.
Very good. Yeah, Nixon was this great American emperor. It's his vision, and it came to fruition 30 years later. But yeah, absolutely.
My parents wouldn't buy anything made in China in my entire life because of that. There's it's slave labor, and then I mean, my mother has one pair of shoes because all shoes are made in China.
yeah, of course. It's always the same. It's a hyper modern, and I say, we live in the postmodern world. No, it's not postmodern. It's the same good old system we have pushed to the extreme.
Interesting.
So it's the same exploitative mentality pushed to the extreme. So it's not enough to pay nothing people here. Good. And we're gonna go to Vietnam, or we're gonna go to the to the boundaries of the universe to pay nothing. And so that's what I call the hypermodern way of doing things. It's just an exasperation of the world as we know it. And then techno-fascism, yes, because I see it as just one structure, which is we have these kings and we have this mass of fanaticized little ants at the bottom who think that they're free, but they live in a cage, and they are extremely aggressive, and they think they are not only free but extremely virtuous too. And for me, it's like, look at yourself in the mirror, and most of you look like monsters. And so think again. And so I gave and everything, and the only language that people understand, despite the hypocrisies and all that, is the language of violence, going back to Tolstoy. And it's the only language, and violence doesn't mean there's have to be brutality. It has to be any kind of bullying form of getting ahead, which is the only thing that is spoken in the system, and that's what also your family tells you, even with tenderness. It says you've got to do this, you've got to that, because that's the way the system works, and you got to get somewhere up there. Again, going back to what I was saying, and this is the language of the hierarchy, and it's the language of bullying and violence. There's no way around it. And so all of that I put under this label of techno-fascism, which is the ethos of this mechanized beehive that we live in, with a few just, again, lording it over the majority. And we have got to find a way to escape it. And this is the duty for us, because we know that we can do better than this. It's so very hard, though.
I have gleaned from your writing that I thought the number one motive, you said justice, but it seems to me that your number one motive is peace.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I like all of us, all we want to do is just like relax, eat sushi, play the
Little
guitar.
grappa.
Yeah, I mean, just like, lays about. And I don't understand this thing. We've got to do this. And in the name of
Calvin did that.
Why?
So I have two more things I have to ask you about because I
Yeah.
need to know what your brain is thinking. And I can't ask anybody else. You said that we've misconstrued or latched onto cultural Marxism and we misunderstand postmodernism and Foucaultism.
Yeah.
Can you explain that? And then the other thing I want you to explain, which may fold in, I don't know, is the concept of Gnosticism generally, but also you say neo-Gnosticism. And those are the two things, cultural Marxism and neo-Gnosticism. And then I will let you go have your grappa.
No, it's been fun. It's there's a long things. So you said, Foucault.
Cultural Marxism is really making the scene right now. And it seems a little facile. Like it seems like a very 20th century dialectic and it's making a comeback.
Yeah, they're putting people against one another. And so the Trump supporters say, oh, this sounds like Marxism to me. And the others are saying, oh, you're just a fascist and a racist and so on and so forth. And they call Marxism because they don't really know where it comes from. But all the story is the political correctness and the politics of diversity that came into being in the 80s were actually something that American intelligentsia, we're talking about the real clever screenwriters up there at the top tiers, create discourse to keep things in a state of illusion, like fake flux to control it better. Discarded the old Marxian story about, all the employers are bad and it's all about economic exploitation, which kind of in an era where the economy was more and more economy of services, didn't really, gel anymore. So they needed another story. And so they adopted this other story, which was crafted by this French philosopher Foucault, who in my book, I tell the story. It's an extraordinary story, completely plagiarized it from another Frenchman who was not an academic. He was a surrealist artist and a very talented sociologist by the name of Bataille.
Yeah, this book, The Ideology of Tyranny.
Yes.
Should read that one for sure. This is also
I'm trying. I am begging Macmillan to give me the rights so I can recirculate this copy for cheap, because it's impossible to find it and it costs an extraordinary amount of money. Whatever.
The subtitle is Bataille, Foucault, and the Postmodern Corruption of Political Dissent.
Yeah. And
Ideology of Tyranny. Keep going. Thank you.
No, thank you for showing it. And so, and so he plagiarizes from this artist who was an avowed Satan worshiper who wanted to bring back human sacrifice in the era of modernity. Yeah, crazy. The guy Bataille is a genius. His book on the economic on the accursed share, which is a treatise on the economics of modernity, is phenomenal. And he came up with this idea of power of modernity, which Foucault then cannibalized this, and which the American screenwriters in the 70s, at the end of the 60s, thought this could be good. Where the story is different. It has nothing to do with Marxism. It's about the fact that there is the machine, right? That we are in the eras of the Terminators. The machines are these mechanical monsters who suck the blood out of this mass of rebellious flesh, which is us in a state of ecstasy and furor and fury and so on and so forth. And in this give and take of this rage against the machine, and in all the heat and the violence that surrounds this cannibalization process of the steel versus the flesh, comes society, where power doesn't exist because it's power itself, says Foucault, circulates at the margin of this battle between steel and flesh, and it fluctuates in an irresolute, issueless kind of dimension. So, and Bataille kind of wrote the story like that. There's a bit more to it, and Foucault retells it, but covered or couched it in absolute very fancy new, packaged in new academic phraseology. So the Americans took that, they brought him to Berkeley, and they said, we're going to use this.
Sorry. See, because I went over. She's right.
Yeah.
It's her time.
What was that? And they're going to use, I apologize. And they're going,
no problem.
I'm just going to.
No, I definitely went over.
Retaliation. And so, and they're going to, so we're going to use this to set in motion or to play with the racial tension in America. And we're not going to talk about the economy and exploitation anymore, but make it all about the strife, about ethnicity and crime and so on and so forth. And everything down to gender theory was a product of this. And it's completely artificial. It's completely different. And the name of Foucault has been forgotten, but this is how it all started. And in 40 years, this incredible story, who kind of germinated out of the brain of this surrealist Satan worshiper, but full of genial ideas, through the elaboration of this hack, Michel Foucault, has become the platform, the discursive platform for the antagonisms of the biparty structure in American politics at the very center of the empire. It's an extraordinary story.
You have to read this book because this book is absolutely jam-packed, super, super dense with that kind of mind vitamin stuff. And that one paragraph is just, there's no way to penetrate that. It's really all in here. I have to say, I'm not just an ad for the book. That's not what I'm doing at all. It's that I read the book and I can barely understand what you're saying, but it's so important. And I've cited it many times because I understood that, or I should say what I observed since I read it in this emergence of the identity politics on the right really solidified made me want to go back and reread it, because then I'll really understand it. You know how you understand something way better once you've observed it and oh, I think, and then somebody then you go back and read your philosophy or whatever. And you're like, yes, that explains it. So I now have to go back and read it. But the other thing, I struggle with this concept all the time, because there are people, especially in the, conspiracy podcasting community, who are re-embracing what they are calling Gnosticism. And some people think it's good and the answer, and some people think it's awful and it's evil. And I'm not even sure I can nail down an answer. I mean, I know it means to know. And I remember Elaine Pagel's and the Dead Sea Scroll and everything, but the idea is that you can look inside yourself and understand, God there or whatever. Is it good? Is it bad? And what is neo-Gnosticism? And then your daughter.
Gnostic. Yeah, Gnostic in a nutshell for me is all that lore, anti-traditional lore, not with the idea. It's basically all that mythologies and tales written a long time ago by the contemporary with those early Christian chronicles that do not believe in the creation of the world by a benevolent God. They basically believe in the story instead of the world being the creation of a demiurge, right? Kind of a second-rate God who botches everything up and so alternative things. And so where the creation is either poorly done or straight up evil or things like that. So alternative sets of creeds and credences antagonistic to the traditional ones who posit a benevolent, good God at the origin of the world. Yeah, these other stories don't believe that.
Okay, excellent. I'll have to ponder that, because I actually think that it makes more sense to me to see a good God. And I always use this example of if you look, I'm from New York. If you look at the skyscrapers in New York, the concept of plumb and level are evidence of objective truth. Because the building will not stand if there isn't true level and true plumb. And I feel so you've got the truth, and then you have to have free will, which is what incorporates that chaos in there. But you have to have it, or you can't have good and evil, and you can't have accountability and choice. I don't know.
Well, but the response to that, they will say, yes, well, you believe in the Apollonian thing, that the creator of the universe is this amazing architect who just created matter with this extraordinary stuff that physicists decipher. But from the viewpoint of the existentialists or the Batailles or the crazies, that's irrelevant, because they may say, yeah, this universe is built by with stupendous artistry, but the drama that's been enacted at the center of the stage is so horrifying and so bloody that I don't know what to do with your great architect. Because the suffering at the center of it is unaccountable. So
is of its very essence, like the deep state, like Lucifer is a deep state fantasy.
No, it's the Gnostic stories that God is somewhere, but who's in charge here is very much Lucifer.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how you write all these books, because it would take me a lifetime to really understand them all. And you've packaged them up so nicely. And I must say, your writing is just a joy. It's just a joy to read. It shames me that I speak only one language and I can't even master it as well as you. And I'm sure you speak more than two, probably.
The good news is that I'm writing much shorter books. And
no, but it was so thick. I was like, I thought I needed 2 weeks to read this, but I kind of did.
I wrote a little gloss to a fable of the Grimm brothers about just what we spoke about it, and you'll read it in 10 minutes. I'll send it to you.
Oh, that's great. Excellent. Oh, so I'm going to let you go, but I would love to have you back, and on your whatever topic you decide, send me something to read. I'll read it and we'll share it with the audience.
It'll be a pleasure. I'll send you a bunch of stuff.
Thank you so much. And thanks for coming out of an evening, because I know you're in Italy and I'm sure it disturbs your family. Thank you so very much, Guido Preparata. Hang on there for a second, if you wouldn't mind. And thank you all for listening. And we will see you next time on Deep Dives with Monica Perez.